The radio crackled, sharp and urgent, slicing through the quiet lull of the ambulance cab. Unit 5, respond code 3, infant unresponsive, parents performing CPR, scene is chaotic. Logan's stomach turned. Sarah, in the driver's seat, let out a shaky breath before flicking on the sirens. Red and blue lights bathed the darkened streets as she floored the accelerator. Logan barely registered the hum of the sirens, the static of the radio, the streetlights flashing by. Infant unresponsive. 2 words that sent a wave of nausea through his gut. These were the calls that paramedics dreaded the most. A grown man coding from a heart attack? That was tragic, but expected. An elderly woman slipping away in her sleep? That was nature. But babies weren't supposed to die. He swallowed hard, already running through the checklist in his head. Epinephrine for resuscitation. CPR with 2-finger compressions. Intubation if necessary. The motions were ingrained in him, but they weren't enough. Not always. Sarah glanced at him, her hands gripping the wheel. "You good?" Logan didn't answer, because what did it matter if he was good? This wasn't about him. The GPS guided them into a suburban neighborhood. Neatly trimmed lawns, porch lights glowing warmly in the night. And then, chaos. A man stood in the driveway, pacing back and forth, his hands clutching at his hair. When he saw the ambulance, he ran toward them, his face streaked with tears. "She won't wake up!" His voice was hoarse, frantic. "Oh my God, she won't wake up!" Logan grabbed the medic bag and sprinted toward the house, Sarah right behind him. Inside, the nursery light cast a soft glow over a room frozen in time. Stuffed animals lined the shelves. Baby blankets folded neatly in a rocker. Tiny shoes placed side by the crib. And on the floor, a mother kneeling over a small, limp body. A baby girl, no more than 6 months old. The mother's hands trembled violently as she pressed down on the baby's chest in weak, frantic compressions. Tears streamed down her face. "I don't know what to do," she sobbed. "She was fine last night. She was fine." Logan knelt beside her and took over. 2-finger compressions. 1, 2, 3, 4. Sarah grabbed the airway kit, moving fast, precise. No breathing, no pulse, starting BVM. The father stood in the doorway, his hands gripping the frame like it was the only thing holding him up. "Please," he whispered. The mother sobbed harder, rocking back and forth, as if willing time to reverse. Logan forced air into the baby's tiny lungs, his hands working on autopilot. "Breathe, baby. Breathe." He had seen a lot of death in his years as a paramedic. Car wrecks, overdoses, shootings. But nothing compared to this. Nothing compared to looking at something so small, so innocent, so undeserving of this. And knowing deep down, this baby had been gone long before they arrived. But they kept going, because how could they stop? The sirens screamed through the night as they tore down the road toward the hospital. Sarah was driving fast, too fast. Logan didn't say anything. He worked in the back, counting compressions, squeezing air into lungs that would never gasp again. The mother sat beside him, her hands clasped together in silent, trembling prayer. The father was up front, face buried in his hands, muttering broken sentences under his breath. Logan glanced at the heart monitor, flatline, no pulse, no rhythm. He turned back to the baby. She was still warm, still soft, still perfect. And yet, she was gone. He felt a pressure in his chest, but he kept going. 1, 2, 3, 4. His hands never stopped, because if they stopped, it meant it was real. And he wasn't ready for that. The ambulance doors swung open, and a wave of nurses and doctors flooded in. A pediatric trauma team was waiting, moving with calculated urgency. They took the baby, voices sharp, precise, clinical. Logan and Sarah stepped back, watching from the doorway, their hands still stained with efforts that wouldn't be enough. A nurse called out, pushing another dose of Another checked for a pulse. A doctor compressed the tiny chest. Logan knew how this would end, and yet the unbearable weight of waiting crushed him. Then, time of death, 2:47 a.m. The room fell silent, and then the mother screamed. The sound ripped through the air, something so raw and soul-breaking that Logan had to look away. The father collapsed into a chair, his shoulders shaking with silent sobs. Sarah turned, rubbing her hands over her face, swallowing hard. No one said anything. Because what could they say? They stood in the hallway, staring at the floor, listening to the sounds of a family breaking apart. Doctors murmured condolences. Nurses stepped quietly around them. But Logan felt numb. Then, the mother turned to them. Her tear-streaked face was vacant, empty. She opened her mouth, but her voice cracked. "She was fine last night." Her voice broke completely. "She was just fine." Logan felt his throat tighten. Sarah didn't answer, because there was nothing to say. Nothing would ever be enough. No sirens, no radio chatter, just the low hum of the ambulance engine as they drove back to the station. Sarah gripped the wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. Logan stared out the window, the image of the baby seared into his mind. She was just fine last night. Her mother's voice echoed in his head. She was just fine. His hands, still stained with the remnants of chest compressions, trembled. Sarah finally spoke, her voice hoarse. "Some calls just don't leave you." Logan didn't answer, because this was one of them, and he wasn't sure it ever would.